Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a product like Narcan and the path that last mile to the patient, if you will, a much different scenario than any you're going to see in biologics or most small molecules, obviously. Yet we've had plenty of conversations on this podcast around like, okay, we have a drug that made it through phase 3. The FDA approved it. We're, celebrating, the champagne bottles are popping. And then 18 months down the road, that product's no longer on the market because the execution of its commercial availability and use just completely falls flat on its face. For myriad reasons, right? It fails. In this case, you had to develop a plan that was unlike any plan that probably had ever been executed in terms of that last mile to the patient. You did it. And as I said, recognizing that's, there probably isn't a very clean parallel to biologics or the products that you're working on now. I'm curious about how that win and that fortitude and that problem solving that you exercised during the Narcan rollout, how does that translate to your commercial perspective now? Like, you're working obviously with different players. You're not working through municipalities and police departments and
Sure.
trying to get people to, add this to your tool belt while you're on the beat. But the lessons, right? And the, like I said, fortitude that it took. Do you find that it translates, or is it just like, well, that happened and it's completely removed from what I'm doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it absolutely translates. I think the biggest translating factor that we are doing here, that we did there, is the people. Nothing in the pharmaceutical industry is traditional anymore. In my mind, there's no 4,000 sales reps on the street selling feature benefit incentive, right? It's that the commercial world is turned on its head. The payer world has been, very, very strong. So it really boils down to the team that you hire in order to execute and deliver. Mm-hmm. And that team isn't just your commercial team. That team is your clinical team, your development team, your regulatory team, your CMC team, your tech ops team. So those learnings the common thread throughout my career is just, I've been extremely fortunate to work with really smart people, and bring smart people into organizations. Because, and not just smart, intelligent smart, but smart, motivated smart. I'll give you an example, Narcan, right? We had a guy who was head of marketing, and, I said to him, listen, I know you want to be head of marketing, but PR is much more powerful than marketing here. And I had to kind of teach him that
probably more powerful and with a product like that necessary. Right?
That's right. And so rather his mindset was, well, he wanted to run marketing. I'm like, well, why don't you focus on running PR? Like, yeah, that is like, and he changed his thinking, right? And so he applied his skill set, but it was just a different approach. The same goes for trade and distribution. Our head of trade and distribution was a traditionalist, right? He's sold traditional products for GSK and other companies through third-party logistics companies. But if he didn't have the ability to think differently about how to distribute product directly to a Department of Health and set up a network that people could sign into a website and order it, and we would ship it locally and bill centrally and have master prescriptions written. He developed that. He learned that. It wasn't a cookie cutter. We couldn't find that role. So those skills, I think, translate into any other job that we have. And that's what I'm bringing, I believe, to Nirvgen. We're going to treat spinal cord injury. No one's really ever succeeded here. Mm-hmm. There's new paths that we have to pave. And if we don't have smart people, but people who could think differently about how to create a path, we're just going to be a traditional pharmaceutical company. Right. And that you can't be that if you're 12 people working virtually across the United States. Yeah. So that's what's translatable. Translatable is pulling a group of people together that are extremely smart, that can actually be motivated enough and generalists, I call them generalists, to be able to work without a net, and to make decisions and to fail and to succeed and to, fail again and succeed. It's that type of mindset in every department that we have. Yeah. Finance, I'll give you an example. Our CFO he's a great guy. He's worked in both Canada and the US. Not a lot of CFOs have. We are a public company in Canada. We're 75% held by retail. That's not typical. Typical biotech path is you have 4 institutional investors that are carrying you all the way. We're not there yet. We may get there. We may never get there. But to be 70% retail, 80% retail at this stage of our life, you need a CFO who's going to think differently than a traditional, somebody who's going to go to the top 15 institutions in the U.S. We have to go into the high net worth groups. We have to go into retail. We have to straddle the fence. But that's just one example of the types of people we are bringing into this organization and have at this organization. Our, chief medical officer is the same way. He came from a large company and now he's working. It's him and one other person in our clinical department. Mm-hmm. He's came from Amgen. Not many people could do that. Yeah. Could oversee. It's great to have the title chief medical officer, but now he's running clinical operations. He's overseeing data management. He's doing things that typical chief medical officers don't do. Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's really the people on the team that you put behind things that are consistently successful.
Yeah. The breadth of his responsibilities is probably considerably more than it was at Amgen. I'm sure he did great work there too, but probably a lot more.
Brilliant mind that is now doing different things in his career that I don't think he probably ever expected he'd be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got some questions for you on people that we're going to get to here in just a minute.
Sure.
More, some more of the NeurVgen roster. But before we go there, I want to talk about peptides for a minute. Like I want to spend some time talking about that. It's kind of funny. Like, I was looking at you guys thinking like, does this fit? Does this fit for the Business of Biotech podcast? And I recalled a conversation I had with the VP of content, effectively my boss here. I don't know, like a year ago. And he was like, so for context, the Business of Biotech and Bioprocess Online is we focus on biologics. Like we focus on large molecule therapeutics, development and manufacture of large molecule therapeutics. And he came to me and he was like, hair on fire. He's like, GLPs. Cause, like any publication, like any publishing industry, like we want to latch on to something that's, going to get clicks, right? Going to get eyeballs, and
sure.
GLPs were it. And I was like, yeah, man, I don't know, like I don't think they fit. I don't think these peptides are a fit with, like, if we're going to stay true to our large molecule, existence, I don't think they fit. And it's ironic because I'm the first guy to break the rules. Like I'll color outside the lines any chance I get. And as time has kind of carried on here, like I said, I mean, sometimes the FDA treats them like a biologic. Sometimes, depending on how big the chain of amino acids is, whatever criteria they apply. Sometimes, so I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and spend more time learning about and covering peptide therapeutics potentially as biologics, right? Like,
sure,
they're biotechs that are building them. Let's just do it. So give me your take. Like, and I've got, we could probably go long on this. Your take on starting with your perspective on taking the job at NeurVgen, right? Like, was this something that you're like, well, was it the indication, opportunity? Was it the therapeutic where you're like, these peptides are kind of catching on. It's a cool modality. Like, what led you into this role? And since you've been in the role, give me your take on sort of the peptide. I don't want to call it a revolution. I mean, like I said, a few approvals a year. It's still sort of nascent, but there's a lot of excitement around peptides.
Yeah. Yeah. I to be fully transparent, when I was looking at this opportunity, I looked at the peptide and I said, wow, this is going to be challenging. because peptides are challenging. They're not easy. They're not easy to manufacture consistently. They're not easy to, purify. There's only a handful of manufacturers in the world who can do it well. And I have no experience in peptide manufacturing. So that was, to me, one of the things I said, okay, well, I look at companies of our size and I look at where they fail and where they fall down. And a lot of them fall down in manufacturing. A lot of complete response letters over the last several years. They do everything perfect clinically, but they either can't make the stuff consistently, or they can't, or if they do and they get approval, they just fail on the launch side. So I got over that by talking to some colleagues that I've worked with in the past who know peptides, know how to manufacture peptides. And it's not rocket science, but you have to have the right people and the right partners to be able to do it. So, I view NVG-291 as a handful of amino acids behind becoming labeled a biologic. And biologics are just as challenging, the formulation development, and so I'm actually learning a lot. And one of the gentlemen that came into our organization, Chuck Olson, he's teaching me. He's our head of tech ops, and he's forgotten more about peptides and biologics and manufacturing than I'll ever know in my entire life. And that, I have to trust that, he knows what he's doing. I mean, I'm a pretty good verifier if somebody's BSing me. But Chuck is the one who's going to get this product manufactured and quality controlled and approved by the FDA, that we can consistently make it over time. So is it an in vogue space? Yeah. I mean, I think, you mentioned it earlier. It's in vogue because of a lot of what Lilly and Novo Nordisk are doing right now, right?
Yeah.
But that's cyclical. I think it's and I think it's in vogue because of everything that they're doing, but they have the know-how. They know how to work in this space. Not a lot of folks do. They are small molecule companies. They're going to have to bolt on the expertise of managing and working in the peptide space, because manufacturing them is not a simple process, and there's a handful of people, like I said, there's a handful of people that can do it. You can tweak a small manufacturing process and have a massive impact on your yields or your effectiveness or your toxicity. So your decision making then really has to be very, very fine tuned, and you make decisions and stick with them. Because once you're too far down the path, you could always improve upon something, but you may tweak something that sends you all the way back to preclinical. Yeah. So it's an art and a science mixed when you're in the peptide space.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you some more questions about the work Chuck is doing here in a minute. But I want to take the conversation around peptides more narrowly into neuro now. So, you talk about it was. I was unaware of the fact that Narcan was a Me Too player, or and also ran before it became the crown jewel, right? Like that was news to me.
Well, it was second. It was new. It was always new and novel. The delivery was always new and novel, but there was just another player who had a similar type of delivery, but they picked the wrong dose, and their clinical trials didn't work out as well. Yeah. So that's why they got the complete response letter. But so I just wanted to make sure it wasn't that they were, we were very different from them. We were very close to them. It's just that we jumped and leapt ahead of them.
Yeah. So maybe it's not a great segue or analogy then, because I was going to say, like, in a situation like you're in now, where you're going after these neuro diseases, spinal cord injury being the lead, but then ALS and Alzheimer's and others on the heels of that. These are indications that have multiple modalities chasing them. We see antibodies, we see the cell and gene therapy space running after this. We see all sorts of human tissue approaches. I mean, there's any number of ways to skin that cat. I don't know if you can still say skin that cat, but I just said it. So where do you see peptides kind of fitting into that landscape in terms of neuro, and why? Like why are peptides a compelling modality to chase down these indications?
Yeah, I mean, I think NVG-291 is novel in that it's not like a lock and key, right? It's not like, you have a receptor that you're trying to attach to and block other things from attaching to it, right? That's how initially it was discovered, right? They discovered that there was this group of molecules, CSPGs, that were inhibiting repair. They're ubiquitous throughout the body. They are kind of like the cement that holds things together in your spinal cord injury. But then when activated due to an injury, they work extremely well at holding things together, but they prevent axonal regeneration. Mm-hmm. So I think Jerry Silver's work early on is really what started this company. Harold Punit, who's the founder, his daughter-in-law had a tragedy. She fell, she got paralyzed, and he started to scour the earth for anything that would help his daughter-in-law. And he came across Jerry's Nature paper and said, wow, I don't think he was thinking, this is a peptide at the time. Mm-hmm. He was thinking this is showing some phenomenal results in animal models. And he had discussions with Jerry, and he ultimately found a group of investors in Vancouver to in-license the technology, and Nirvgen was formed. So I think sometimes, I'm trying to give an analogy. I'm coming blank, but sometimes the therapeutic will define the space rather than the space defining the therapeutic.
Yeah.
Right? And then through our work with NVG-291, Matvey Lukachev, who's our head of preclinical development, and has identified other different ways, which are similar ways, has discovered NVG-300. And now we're testing that. And that is actually, could potentially qualify as a biologic. So even though we're a peptide with NVG-291, our next product could potentially be a biologic. Mm-hmm. So we're not necessarily wedded to being the peptide company.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're trying to take what NVG-291 has demonstrated preclinically, and we're trying to see if it can be translated into humans, because it basically, and we're learning a lot. We're learning a ton, and we're doing a lot more work on NVG-291. We're trying to get down to, well, what is the exact molecular mechanism? We know what happens when you put it into the situation, right? We know that it turns CSPGs off, you get axonal regeneration, you get remyelination of damaged axons, and you enhance plasticity near and far from the injury. So what we don't know is, well, molecularly, how is it doing that? And that's what we're doing now. We're doing a lot of work to understand it. Now, we hope to have all of that work in a nice package with a bow on it to sit down with the FDA, but look at all the package inserts of all the products that are out there that are approved at the first line in the mechanism of action stage. The actual mechanism is not known, however, and then all of the data, goes. So that's right now, if the package insert were printed, we'd be a peptide. We would say we don't know the specific molecular mechanism, however, and then it would be all the data that we do see. So, I know I'm kind of skirting your question around on peptides, but I think, we're wedded to peptides because we're wedded to NVG-291.
Yeah.
NVG-300 works and translates. We'll be wedded to biologics.
Yeah.
So we're opportunistic in that, finding products that will solve problems for diseases that are, the uniqueness, the way NVG-291 works is different than how other people are targeting the disease. They're targeting, they're trying to get nerves to grow. They're trying to get things to fight through the glial scar. What we're doing is we're just shutting off something that is in the body that is stopping things from repairing itself.
Yeah.
So we'll see if it works, and we'll, I think we're going to be synergistic with, especially in spinal cord injury. I think it's going to be 2 or 3 different products mechanistically that will give folks gains. And it's really, as you dig into spinal cord injury, you realize that it's going to be as much pressure is going to be put on the drug to produce as the patient to produce, because we can actually, if we can regenerate, right? If we can remake connections and remyelinate, that's step one. The patient is actually going to have to turn those muscles that those nerves are talking to into motion and action and function. So that's why, we're doing this study at Shirley Ryan, and we're doing it in a rehab facility, and we're combining all of those modalities together.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. I want to talk, like I said, I want to get back to the work that Chuck is doing, and I want to kind of frame it up like this. Like, it's interesting. You got a guy like you, Mike Kelly. He's seen a whole bunch of products through to commercialization. He's experienced those wins. He's well experienced at putting products on the market and seeing them through. And then he joins Nervgen, and it's like, well, at the surface level, he just took a giant step backward, because, 1B2A is cool and everything, but it's still quite a ways from the commercial side of things. So on one hand, you're like, wow, that's a giant step backward. Like, if Mike sticks around there for a few years, he's unlikely, at least in the short term, to feel that again, right? But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know why. I'm thinking, I don't know why you wouldn't want someone in the CEO's chair who has taken things through development all the way to commercialization at this early stage, because the work that Chuck Olson is doing in tech ops and CMC, he's making decisions, he and others, I'm sure, are making decisions that are either going to seal, they're going to seal the fate one way or the other, right? They have major implications on how quickly you move through the clinic and how, to your point, manufacturable these difficult to work with peptides are. All sorts of regulatory implications. So I'm using a lot of words here to get back to Chuck Olson and the work he's doing. And I'd like you to share with us about, some of the details around the work he's doing that you look at and you go, yeah, like, we're still developing, we're still figuring out manufacturability, but the decisions he's making are going to pay dividends when we're in phase 3 and beyond.
Yeah. So it gets back to the people component that I talked about earlier. We just actually, it's funny because I was on with a group yesterday and we were talking about, bringing another, person of talent into the organization, and everybody has their opinion on what that person should be doing and saying, and, their experience and how long they should be around, whether they should be a PhD or this or that and the whole 9 yards. And, I think it's important to coalesce around experience is one thing, but working in this environment in a startup I've seen people who are phenomenally experienced at Merck. I've hired them and I put them in this environment and they vapor lock. And what I mean by vapor lock is like they don't have an assistant. They don't have, they have to actually figure out how to work their computer. They may not get a computer for the first couple of days. When they do get a computer, they have to learn how to do our filing system online. They have to make their own travel arrangements. They have to run their own schedule. They have to call their own meetings. We have outsourced HR. So if they have an issue, they have to, it's just not the right environment for everybody. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks like all of that stuff taken care of. Mm-hmm. And then they can operate. In this environment, you have to go with the flow and operate and take care of it. But with that, you get to make bigger decisions than you've ever made before in your career. And that's what fuels people. And so I look for people who could live in this environment and thrive in this environment. And I'm a very big fan of test driving, because they're testing us, we're testing them. So Chuck is a perfect example. Chuck joined us as a consultant. Yeah. He had his own consulting company. He started working 5 hours a week and 10. And then Chuck started working like 30 to 40 hours a week and not billing us. And I'm like, hey, Chuck, do you want to join the company? And I know you're going to be putting your company on hold. But we really could use you on the leadership team of this company. And he joined the company. So that to me is, he's doing more than just CMC and tech ops. He's a generalist. He's running a big portion of this business. He's empowered by that. He's making big decisions. When he's challenged with, if it's a huge decision, he brings it to the management team, and we meet once a week. And he says, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Here's the decision I'm making. Here are the alternatives. Does anybody agree, disagree? And people challenge him. People say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about this? Well, what about this?
Yeah, I guess so. Just to kind of summarize the discussion around Chuck, which is the same discussion around everyone who's running a function in my group, on my team, is they have to be a generalist. They have to be a strategic thinker. They have to have good judgment because they're making judgment calls every day. And, we can't have this hierarchical approval of things. We wouldn't get anything done. So, yeah. And they can't be afraid of making a decision and moving on. And, if it's a major decision, they also have to have the sound judgment to know that this is a major decision that's going to have knock-on effects to the business. So I'm going to bring it to the team and just vet my decision here. Mm-hmm. So that's the process. It's, and then, you go away and execute. So it's not like we're spending weeks on trying to figure something out. You bring it to the team, you make a decision, you move on.
Yeah. Does Chuck also bear the bulk of the responsibility for your relationship with outsourced manufacturers?
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chuck and a woman named Judy, both, they're our CMC department. Mm-hmm. They manage our relationships with drug substance. They're looking right now at our supply chain for drug supply, and tech transfers and tech ops and enhanced changes in formulations and everything. So those two manage everything having to do with manufacturing, CMC. Chuck also oversees regulatory. So we don't have a regulatory person in-house. We will ultimately be bringing somebody in-house, but at this stage of the company, we don't, we need experts, and to hire the experts, it would cost way too much money. So, and they would be bored because we have one program. So we hire experts and they report into, Chuck and me and Dan, when we need advice on what to do and what to say and how to approach the FDA.
Yeah, it's an interesting point around personnel decisions and who you bring on full time. I mean, great example in Chuck in that, you said, hey, this consultant that we're using, we could use him full time and then some right now. So it's a timely time to bring him in. I've found in my discussions with biotech leaders that there doesn't necessarily appear to be like a super formulaic approach to, when you bring in a CMO or a chief regulatory officer or a chief commercial officer. The general response I get is like, well, the sooner the better, but they don't all, not everyone follows the same playbook. So I guess two-part question on that. What is your sort of general approach to like spacing out, sort of gating the hiring of these positions and like why? What's sort of the strategy behind when you bring these people on board? Because if you do it at the wrong time, I mean, you're either wasting money early, to your point, like you'd be wasting money on a chief regulatory officer right now. You bring them in too late, you could create some problems there too.
That's right. And I think small companies like ours typically tend to err on the too late side of things, mainly because of cash, right? But, I think the way I make decisions, and I think the way most of my team makes decisions on bringing people in is, I'll give you an example. Our head of preclinical right now is working on MVG 300 and advancing that, but also working on all the preclinical package for MVG 291. And we weren't doing a ton of work on MVG 300. We raised some capital. We had some cash. We gave it to him. So now he's got 15 to 20 projects going. He's working 50 hours a week. He's not taking a vacation in a year. It's like, hey, it's time that you bring some help on here, because he is prioritizing. MVG 291 is the lead priority. I said, but now that we told the world we have 300 and we set some expectations externally, now we got to hit these deadlines. So I think it's two things to answer your question directly. Number one, when you see the talent, you have to hire them. Right. When you find somebody like a Chuck who's working extremely well with the organization. He works seamlessly with the executive team. He led the group in CMC. So when you find him, you hire him, or you try to get him here as quickly as you can. Even if it's only 50% job, and for him it was much more than 50%. So my rule of thumb is if there's 75% of a job here and you find somebody, hire them. And if you don't find that person, keep looking until it gets closer, and if you're over 100%, you're in trouble. So you should have already been looking. So we're constantly looking. That's one of the things about executives and startups. They are constantly looking for talent who will live well in this environment and execute. And it's hard to find. So when you find them, either hire them as a consultant to do some work for you to keep them close to you, or stay in touch with them. And I right now have, we just hired a head of program management at the same time we hired Chuck. And she was a consultant as well, and she joined us. We currently have a consultant working on corporate and business development, and I've worked with him for 15 years. And as soon as I get enough cash in the coffers, I'm going to hire him full time. So that's kind of how we operate. And I think it's A, you got to identify the talent, and then B, you have to time it right so that they're not sitting on their hands and doing nothing.
Right.
But if you hire the right startup type person, they'll do anything. They'll do, like I'll give you a perfect example, Liz Eberhard, who's our head of program management. She's dug in and she's the key point person on enrollment in our current clinical trial. That's not her job, but she has the experience, and she's mature enough, and she's, well versed enough in PR, which is essentially what you're doing when you're trying to bring awareness to your trial, to oversee an outside sourced PR firm. So she stepped in, she stepped up, and she's running it. So that's kind of the model.
Yep. You bring up an important point. Just a couple more questions, then we're going to have to wrap things up. We're running short on time. But you bring up the point around like, I'm going to hire this guy as soon as I can afford to, right? And companies find themselves, companies like Nirvgen. As a matter of fact, I think you do probably find yourself in one of those positions right now where, maybe the cash runway management needs to be a little bit more scrupulous because you're running up to a point where soon, perhaps, I don't know, I don't want to make any forward-looking statements, but perhaps soon in the next few quarters, you'll have some. You're pre-human data right now. We'll put it that way. You're pre-human. Data.
I can tell you, we publicly stated. I think our financials were released this morning. We have a couple of years of cash, so we have plenty of cash in the coffers. We're targeting to complete enrollment in the chronic cohort this quarter, which would give us data in Q1 of next year for that cohort, and that's really going to be the coming out party for this company. Once we have that data, we're working financially to make sure that we're in a position where we can uplist onto NASDAQ. We can get some institutional investors in. We can fund our phase 3. We're actually interviewing people today to help us tee up that phase 3. So all of this work is being done. So to answer your question, we're targeting Q2 for chronic enrollment and targeting Q1 for data.
Yeah. Well, you answered multiple of my questions because that's where I was going. Like, you're at this point where you get that data. That's an inflection point that could open some, I don't want to say floodgates. We won't put the cart in front of the horse, but it could certainly open up some funding opportunities. So I was curious about what the funding strategy might look like. Should you get to that point and the data looks real good. You mentioned that you're, largely retail right now. Where would you like to see the company, maybe at this point, next year, right? Like August 2025, in terms of like where the stuff that's feeding the coffers is coming from.
Yeah. Let's see. August of 25, I would love to be either meeting with the FDA for an end of phase 2 meeting, and or preparing very closely to getting an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. I'd love to be uplisted on NASDAQ with 3 to 5 major institutions that are in this space that believe in us and believe in the data that we've just produced, in order to help us fund us to commercial. Now, obviously, that it really is dictated upon how big that next study is and how much that next study is going to cost. But I really want to be in a position where funding is not an issue for this company anymore, and talent acquisition is. That's really the key. Is so if we're here this time next year, teeing up a phase 3 program for chronic spinal cord injury, and then hopefully MVG 300 is entering into or in the middle of IND enabling studies, depending on funding. I think that's a real company. That's like, not that we're not a real company today, but I mean, that's a real NASDAQ listable company.
Yeah.
And I think that has some vision on where we're going and what we're doing and timelines and how to get there.
Yeah. Very good. Well, like I said, we're short on time, so I'm going to let you off the hook for now. I'm going to suggest that we regroup in August 25. It'd be, we could revisit this conversation. Say, here's where you said you wanted to be, Mike.
That's perfect.
1 year ago. What's it looking like today? That'd be fun. But I wish you all the luck in the world. It's a fascinating story, and you've been very transparent, and I think there's a lot of value sort of in the stories that you've shared with us. So thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. So that's Nirvgen CEO Mike Kelly. I'm Matt Pillar, and you just listened to The Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect, and we represent the entire community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biotech builders that you'll find in that community, including Bioprocess Online, Cell and Gene, Advancing RNA, Clinical Leader, Life Science Leader, Outsource Pharma, and more. And if you like listening to The Business of Biotech, you might like watching it even more. Go to the Listen and Watch tab at bioprocessonline.com. Check that out. We drop every Monday. We'll see you then. In the meantime, thanks for listening.